Episode 1 of Duster begins with a black woman called Nina Hayes discussing her struggles growing up in Baltimore. She goes on to reveal how she hears no or you can't all the time, not just for the colour of her skin, but also as a woman, but it simply inspires her to do more. She's a promising agent at the FBI and she's determined to set out and make a name for herself. The agents interviewing her make it clear she was only hired as a diversity hire for the previous administration, and now that President Hoover is dead, they're not quite sure what else to do with her. However, as fate would have it, she gets her wish to be transferred, given they're down a man in Phoenix, so off she goes. Cut forward to sunny Arizona, where we meet a suave guy called Jim Ellis. He's with his niece Luna, who joins him on an operation to smuggle goods for a crime syndicate. It doesn't take long for Jim to be followed after the drop, with a man named Gavin determined to track him down. Now, Jim is quite the driver though, and he effortlessly escapes the men. He shows up with the package, which happens to be a new heart for a dying man. Jim earns money wherever he can, and after dropping off Luna back home, along with some money for mum Izzy, we learn a bit more about his job. Jim is on the inside with the Saxton family, which is a growing syndicate where he works as a getaway driver. The man he saved with another heart is called Royce, who happens to be a prominent member of this group and the heir to taking over his father. There's also Genesis, who's the daughter and runs a bar in town called the Azure Lounge. Jetting down in the midst of this is Nina Hayes, who's picked up from the airport by a friendly agent called Awan, who brings her over to the FBI. Nathan Abbott is the director of this branch and shows her around the place. While the director himself is nice enough, the other senior agents, including Agent Grant, aren't so accommodating. They give Nina a hard time, pointing out that the investigation she's about to take over is actually cursed. The previous agent working on this, Leland Breen, isn't in the office and details a light on the ground about his current whereabouts. All the raids have come up empty despite Ezra Saxton having his hand in trafficking weapons and drugs. Nina's job here is strictly red tape though, which includes checking over property records, bank accounts and the like, so it's pretty tedious work. Nina wastes little time getting stuck in though, deciding to take a peek at the Azure Lounge's statements and checking over whatever Breen has found so far. Word of the car chase gets across to Hayes too, and she decides to head on down to investigate that, especially when she hears about the red duster involved. She's not alone on this though, as she sticks pretty closely to Awan, who's slightly intimidated by her confidence, but is at least a decent agent and not blinded by prejudice. Nina tracks down the fast food joint Jim grabbed the heart from earlier on, and despite the guy giving her the runaround with Jim's description, he does eventually reveal Luna's name, which in turn links back to Jim Ellis and the heart. With growing evidence, one guy who's not particularly enthused with how this is going to go down happens to be Agent Grant. He's one of the senior agents at the FBI office that I mentioned earlier, and we've seen a good deal of him so far across this episode. He warns Nina off from barking up the Ellis tree, given he's loyal to Saxton and won't bite. However, Nina ignores this advice and confronts Jim that night anyway, using Luna as a bargaining chip. She offers him a way out, deciding that instead of busting him for the organ trafficking, if he signs an informant contract with her, she'll keep him out of prison. In the meantime, it'll help Nina build a profile against Ezra Saxton, the patriarch at the very top. Jim flat out refuses and shrugs off her threats, but it certainly rattled him as he heads over to his pa's place and picks up his passport. Jim knows Nina isn't messing about, so he decides to hightail it and head south for a while until the heat dies down a bit. That includes striking a deal with someone called Mad Raoul, who's quite the character. Jim literally signs a contract in blood with him, but the details around this are rather sketchy to say the least. For now, he does another job for Saxton, which we saw a little bit about earlier in the episode. Union man Bob Temple is causing trouble for Saxton's gang, so Jim recruits his friend and diner waitress Cassidy to show up at the hotel Bob's hanging out in over at Winter Haven. The Conquistador Hotel is the location, and after spiking Temple's drink, they stage photos of him having an affair with Cassidy, despite the guy unable to even string two words together. They're interrupted though by another guy showing called Cal, who arrives and starts a fight. Jim and Cassidy do manage to get away and drive into the night, but it's certainly touch and go for a while. Now while this is happening, Nina continues her digging and soon works out that Jim Ellis's brother, Joey, worked for Saxton too, and died on the job when his van exploded. This explosion was actually caught on camera, but it was labelled as an accident. Of course, that's far from the truth here, but this investigative work also flies in direct violation of Agent Grant's orders earlier in the episode. As a result, the director calls Nina into a meeting later that day. He confirms that she's being transferred out to Montana, far away from this case despite beginning to make headway on it, and she begins packing her stuff. Awan manages to find the surveillance footage of the van. Nina also receives a call from Jim's stepmother, Charlotte here. We saw her briefly eavesdropping on Jim earlier on in the episode while he was speaking to his father about laying low and getting out of Dodge. She reveals Jim's plan to the agent with specific emphasis on when he's meeting Saxton. Nina intercepts Jim before he can arrive to see Saxton, showing him the footage of the van exploding. She opens up a bit here too, explaining that her father is called Virgil and used to work for Saxton back in the day, in Philly after the war. He had a corner store and wanted out of the operation, so Saxton wound up having him killed, the same way that she presumes he's killed Joey. The surveillance footage seems to indicate that a charge was placed under the van, given that's where the explosion occurred originally, and Nina is convinced that he's falling prey to Saxton the same way that her father did. In the end, Jim makes his decision and decides to work with Nina Hayes after all. Given the results she's managed to get, it soon changes some of the opinions at the FBI office as Nina marches up to the director and shows off the informant contract she's managed to get signed. The case soon thickens though when we learn that there's a suspicious number of missing documents that Breen may have obtained while doing his digging. Is there a crooked cop on the gang's payroll? Well, that seems to be the thinking here, especially as we cut across to Jim signing the contract with Nina outside, and as we pan across, we see that there's watchful eyes of the police spying this from a cruiser nearby. So episode 1 of Duster sets up what should be an intriguing series to follow as we dive deeper into this crime-riddled world of Arizona in the 1970s. Nina and Jim should make a good team here, both in this against Saxton for their own reasons, while the threat of a potential mole with the police makes things all the more interesting. The show itself doesn't do anything particularly original beyond that though, at least not from what we've seen in this first episode, and along with heavy-handed exposition when introducing Nina and her backstory, a lot of the other characters are pretty stereotypical and one note so far. Josh Holloway does well to chew up the scenery with his dialogue and his scenes definitely pop, but at the moment there's not much else beyond that to help this stand out next to so many other shows out there. Still, it's enough to stick with, and hopefully the episodes coming up step it up a gear and start to deepen the ties with the gangs. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.